Have you ever felt like you're fighting alone? Like everything you're trying to build keeps falling apart, and no one notices the effort? Like every step forward is immediately pushed back by some invisible force? This is the story of someone who felt that way too. Who also thought about giving up. Who also believed the world might have forgotten him. But he discovered something different. Something you might need to hear today. Ethan sat in an old car parked in the corner of an almost empty parking lot. The passenger window wouldn't roll up anymore. The torn seat upholstery revealed yellowed foam, and the ceiling bore mold stains. Rain lightly tapped the windshield, tracing paths on the fogged glass. It was night. One of those nights when even the weather seems to remind you that things aren't okay. He had just left another interview. The third that week. The 8th that month. And the answer was always the same. Thank you for your interest, but we've chosen another candidate. He leaned his head back against the seat, closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. The kind that doesn't come from the mouth, but from the soul. At 38, Ethan no longer had the business that once supported his household. He no longer had a home. He was living in his uncle's guest room, doing odd jobs to survive, and trying in vain to hold on to any shred of dignity. There, alone in that car, he wondered if it still made sense to keep trying. When everything you do seems to go wrong, there comes a time when even breathing feels like too much effort. Maybe you've felt that way. Like the world spins normally for everyone else except you. And in those moments, it's hard to believe that anything will change. But Ethan didn't know that the answer he had been asking for had already begun to be written. Just not in the way he expected. He looked into the rearview mirror and stared at his own reflection. Tired eyes, unshaven face, signs of sleepless nights. Who are you, he thought. The truth is, he no longer knew. And maybe that's why he cried. A silent cry, swallowed, as if ashamed even to feel. At that moment he didn't want advice. He didn't want cliches or optimistic words. He just wanted a sign that it was still worth continuing. That he was still seen by God. And you? Have you ever felt that way? Reached the point where all you wanted was a sign? 2 days later, while washing cars at a gas station, an older customer appeared. A friendly gentleman who came by every week. Ethan always served him politely, even without the desire to chat. That day, he found a small note along with the tip the man left on the car's console. It read in simple, firm handwriting, "God sees you." Just that. 3 words. But for some reason, those words pierced Ethan's heart like none had before. He stood still for a few minutes, holding that soap and rain-soaked paper, trying to understand why it hit him so hard. Sometimes, it's in a simple phrase that we find the beginning of a new story. And maybe this is the time for you to comment here. What kind of sign have you received when you thought about giving up? Ethan put that note in his pants pocket, and that night, instead of going straight to bed as he did every day, he sat for a few minutes on his uncle's porch, looking at the sky. Not that he expected to hear an audible answer. But there was a strange peace in that silence. A subtle, almost imperceptible feeling that something was changing. Not on the outside, but inside. It was the first time in a long time that he felt like talking to God, even if it was just to say, "I'm still here." The next morning, while waiting for the bus that would take him to his next gig, he saw a small neighborhood church at the end of the street. It had always been there, but he had never truly noticed it. Maybe because he was always rushing. Maybe because he was always running away. That Sunday, with no specific plan, he decided to go in. He was tired of the streets, the weight on his shoulders, his own mind. He just wanted to sit in a place where he didn't have to appear strong. And that's exactly what he found there. The service was starting when he entered. Some families seated, an elderly lady handing out discreet smiles at the door, and a soft-voiced pastor reading a verse that said, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Ethan sat in the last pew. Those words seemed to have been spoken directly to him. For a few seconds, he forgot about the overdue rent, the recent rejections, and felt only relief. A relief that didn't come from solutions, but from the simple feeling of not being alone. In the following weeks, he returned to that church. First on Sundays, then to a small group during the week. He didn't talk much, just listened, observed, felt, and slowly, he realized that maybe he wasn't the only one trying to survive, that other people were also rebuilding, that there was more pain behind the smiles than he had imagined, and that helped him. Because when we understand that we're not the only ones rowing against the tide, the journey doesn't seem so lonely anymore. One day after the service, Pastor Charles, a calm man with a firm voice and eyes that seemed to see beyond words, approached him. "You've been coming regularly," he said. Ethan just nodded. "If you'd like to help with small tasks around here, we're always in need of hands." No need to answer now. He didn't respond, but the following week he was already there. He arrived early, arranged chairs, helped with the microphones. It was simple, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Ethan's transformation wasn't quick, nor spectacular. It was slow, almost invisible to others, but constant. He started sleeping better, taking better care of himself. And one of those days, while cleaning the church's storage room, he found a box with old items. Among dusty books and forgotten notebooks, there was an old Bible, with a worn cover and marked pages. He opened it, almost absent-mindedly, and found an underlined verse. "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." It was as if everything around him began to conspire for him to believe again. Maybe now you're remembering something similar. A door that opened in a simple way. Person who appeared at the right moment. A small gesture that changed everything. If that's happened to you, share it in the comments. Sometimes your story can be exactly the sign someone needs to find today. Over time, Ethan began to feel he could take another step. He didn't know exactly what, but something inside him said that staying still was no longer an option. Then, talking to one of the church volunteers, he heard about an evening technical course in electricity that was offering full scholarships for people starting over. He wasn't sure if it was for him. It had been years since he last studied. But something that brought him back to his childhood was the memory of tinkering with wires and dismantling, fixing gadgets with his dad. It stirred up a long-lost feeling, purpose. Even though he was afraid he might not keep up, Ethan signed up. The first few weeks were a test of endurance. By day, he was still washing cars and doing small repairs whenever he could find them. At night, he sat in a cold-lit classroom, surrounded by energetic young students, doing his best to stay awake and focused. It was hard. His body begged for rest, and his mind doubted everything. But something inside him wouldn't let him quit. It was like that simple phrase from the note still echoed inside him. God sees you. Ethan started writing everything down. Not just what he learned in class, but what he felt. He used an old notebook Pastor Charles had given him. He wrote down his small victories. The day he understood how a circuit worked. The moment a teacher praised his dedication. The time he helped a classmate figure out a complicated formula. He also wrote about the tough days, the setbacks, the doubts. But when he read it back, he realized the good days were starting to outnumber the bad. Slowly, he began to see himself again. Not as the man who had lost everything, but as someone building a brand new story. One night, after a particularly difficult class, Ethan nearly gave up. He came home, dropped his backpack to the floor, and sat on his bed with his head in his hands, exhausted, frustrated, small. Then he opened the notebook and saw a sentence he had written on impulse days before. Success belongs to those who refuse to quit. He stared at those words like they were a mirror. And in that moment he got it. It's not about winning fast. It's about not giving up halfway. That Saturday, while sweeping the church hall before service, Pastor Charles passed by and casually said, "God honors those who keep going, even when everything still feels small." That stuck with him all day. Sometimes it feels like everyone else has it easier. Like nobody carries what you carry. But the truth is, No one really knows what the person next to them is facing. And that's why perseverance is such a powerful, quiet choice. Have you ever had a moment when everything screamed at you to stop, but something deeper in you whispered, "Keep going"? Drop your story in the comments. Your courage might spark hope in someone who's close to giving up. A few months later, Ethan completed the electrical course with honors. He wasn't the top student, but he was one of the only ones who never missed a single class. Not even when he was sick, drained, or feeling completely defeated. The certificate looked ordinary, just a plain piece of paper with his name at the top. But for him it meant everything. It was quiet proof of all he refused to give up on. Tangible evidence that doors still exist, even when everything feels locked. One Sunday morning after service, a church member introduced him to someone, a friend who managed an electrical maintenance company. It was a casual chat in the parking lot between a cup of coffee and a handshake. Ethan didn't expect much, but he listened with attention and respect. The next week he got a phone call. "Can you come in and talk with us tomorrow?" He went, heart racing, hands sweating, faith small but alive. The interview wasn't formal. The manager looked him in the eye and said, "I don't care much about resumes. I hire people who don't give up." That's how Ethan got the job. He started out as an assistant, carrying tools, watching the pros, taking notes quietly. But his dedication stood out fast. Within months, he was solving small issues on his own, guiding new hires, and getting trusted with more complex tasks. Every time he stepped into a new project, he remembered where he'd started, the old car, the rain, the rearview mirror. And that kept him humble, grounded, focused. During this time he kept showing up at church. He eventually began sharing parts of his story with the younger guys in the support group. Not to boast, but to show that sometimes pain and purpose walk side by side. One night, in a group circle, someone asked, "What does success mean to you?" Ethan paused. Then he said, "Success isn't reaching where others will applaud. It's waking up each day and choosing to do good, even when no one's watching." A young man in the group cried. He said he needed to hear that. And right then, Ethan realized. His healing wasn't just about fixing his own life. It was the start of something bigger, a spark for others to begin again too. Maybe now's a good time for you to reflect. What does success really mean to you? Leave your answer below. Not to impress anyone, but to put into words something you might already be living without realizing it. 2 years had passed since that night in the car, since the forgotten note, since the pain that once felt endless. Now, Ethan stood in a clean uniform, name badge on his chest, tools at his waist, leading a small electrical maintenance team at a local public school. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But every morning, he woke up knowing his life mattered. And that, to him, was the definition of success. One Friday afternoon, while fixing wiring in the school's computer lab, a student walked up to him, curious, shy. "How'd you learn to do all this?" she asked. Ethan smiled and answered simply, "By messing up, trying again, and mostly by not quitting." She smiled back and ran off, as if she'd just heard a precious secret. And maybe she had. That night, he came home, pulled out his old notebook, and wrote, "Today I saw hope in someone's eyes. Not because I said something profound, but because my life became the message." Then he opened that old Bible, the one always beside his bed now, and reread the verse he knew by heart. Do not despise these small beginnings. It wasn't just words anymore. It was real. It was truth. It was his story. The next Sunday, during a prayer moment at church, Pastor Charles invited people to share something God had done for them lately. Ethan hesitated. He didn't like speaking in public, but something nudged him forward. He walked to the front, slow steps, fast heartbeat, and said, "I've learned success isn't winning fast. It's walking on even when everything says stop. And that when we refuse to give up, God refuses to let us fall." The room went quiet for a moment. Then applause. But it wasn't applause for accomplishment. It was recognition. It was a room full of people who knew what it meant to keep fighting. Back in his seat, an elderly woman gently touched his shoulder and said, "My grandson needed to hear that." And Ethan smiled. Because he finally understood. None of it was wasted. Not one tear. Not one closed door. Not one sleepless night. They had all led him here. And sometimes, success begins when you simply refuse to let failure write your ending. That night before bed, he opened the old note. "God sees you." Now those words didn't hurt. They were a reminder. Truth. A promise that carried him still. And if you've made it this far, maybe it's because you needed that reminder too. Maybe today is the day to pick up that old decision, that silent prayer, that dream you shelved a long time ago, and take one more step. Not because everything's fixed, but because you've decided not to stop. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Here, with every video, you'll find more than words. You'll find hope. Leave a comment below about what stood out to you. Or share your own story. 'Cause sometimes, your courage is exactly where someone else's new beginning begins.